People don't realize this, but Ford and General Motors, their key strategy is not really to worry too much about selling cars in Europe or South Korea, to be honest. It's to take a huge share of the world's second biggest car market. That is the US car market, or the North American car market. It's massive. They've planned on investing billions. They thought they were doing that under the auspices of having an advantage over other automakers who were making their cars outside of the US. But now that advantage is no more. It has been removed. And frankly, if I was Ford and GM, I would be furious as well. The US government has played an interesting hand. You could say they've played chess when others are playing checkers, but I think that many companies, General Motors and Ford in particular, are going to be pretty angry. They're going to say, you played us for fools, you got us to invest all this money, and then you changed the rules. And they would be right. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm the Electric Viking. Great to see you. Welcome to all the new subscribers. Welcome back, everyone else. Welcome to the year 2023. Isn't it crazy? How did we get here? I don't know what's going on, but it really does genuinely feel like every year is literally going faster than the one before it. How is this possible? It's like somebody, some omnipotent being or some cruel omnipotent being is literally speeding up the clock of time. Well, for me, that's how things are. I don't know why. I mean, when I was a little kid, I remember time taking forever. What on earth happened? Anyway, this has been reported on now by a few different news agencies. They're all being a bit soft on this. I'm wondering if they're getting funding from the government and they're sort of saying, oh, well, we're going to just be nice about how we say this. It's not time to be nice. It's time to tell the freaking truth. The truth is the US government has played automakers. They've just changed the rules on the IRA. Well, maybe they'll change their minds again when the automakers get angry that they've been played. Now, the reason they've done this is obvious, very clear. There's been lobbying from South Korea, from Europe, from governments all around the world to say it's criminal. You're doing a criminal thing here. Your tax incentives for EVs made in America are illegal. And I've reported on their, in my opinion, ridiculous comments over the past few months. But it seems as though they have had an effect. And the US government has therefore changed its mind. New Treasury EV federal tax credit rules will benefit foreign automakers massively. They will change the game for those foreign automakers. Manufacturers who make electric cars in Europe, including in particular Germany, and Asia, especially South Korea, have been extremely upset and angry about the federal EV incentives. They've lost their EV tax credits and they're furious. Now, interestingly, they've been angrier, far angrier by a factor of, 100 than Tesla was when it ran out of tax credits, and it just was a bit annoyed, but it didn't really say much at all, which is strange. Seems to me as though the sales crush has already started to hit them, and it has. Kia EV6, Hyundai Ioniq 5 sales have already dropped massively since the removal of the $7,500 credit. So you can see it does make a difference. As of the 1st of January in 2023, in order to qualify for the EV tax credit, a car must be finally assembled in the US, has to cost less than $55,000 for a sedan, wagon, or crossover-y type thing, or less than $80,000 for an SUV or light-duty truck. Now, I've reported on the bizarre rules they've put on Tesla, which they haven't applied to other makers like Volkswagen, which were that a Tesla Model Y, if it has 7 seats, will qualify. If it has 5 seats, it won't. Now, it's a bit more complex than that. I'll put a link in the description below to the video I made about that bizarre scenario. Now, these rules coming will require batteries in those cars in the future to use materials and components sourced from within the US or from a country that has a free trade agreement with the US. But the Treasury Department says it needs more time to create the rules and regulations that will implement those provisions, meaning General Motors and Ford, more than likely, are not in a position yet to comply. They need to give them time to comply, which, to be honest, that's okay. Who cares? It says it should have them ready to go by March. In the meantime, no sourcing rules will be in effect. Now, it's changed the rules. In fact, it changed the rules on the 29th of December. And I'm sure that automakers will have something to say about this when they actually figure out, when they've woken up from their hibernation over the Christmas New Year period, they'll have something to say about this. And it's sort of interesting timing. I mean, if you want to introduce these rules at a time when you know there's going to be no kickback for at least a little while, that's the time to do it, the 29th of December. The Treasury Department issued new guidance on the 29th of December about the rules that will implement the provisions regarding the federal EV tax credit as provided for in the Inflation Reduction Act. In a change of government policy, Treasury now says no tax credit for you if you buy a foreign-made electric car, but if you lease that car, you get the credit. All you've got to do is lease the car and you'll get the credit. And obviously in many states, leasing the car is very similar to buying it. So essentially, there's really no disadvantage for automakers building EVs outside of North America. I mean, yeah, there's a small one, but obviously people can just lease the car and still get the credit. So that's what's going to happen. And this is how it works according to Clean Technica. If a car is leased technically, it is owned by the leasing company, not an individual consumer. As such, the lease qualifies under the commercial section of the Inflation Reduction Act. The rules for that section are considerably less strict about place of final manufacture and sourcing. So if you have a Kia EV6, if you lease a Kia EV6 or a Hyundai Ioniq 5, the full $7,500 tax credit applies to you. Even though, some of those models are more than the $55,000, it still applies. If you buy the same car from a dealer after December the 31st, now apparently the leasing exception will apply even after Treasury issues its final rules later this year, because the battery materials and components provisions in the IRA are not applicable to commercial vehicles. So the reason for this is, like I said, massive pressure from the European Union and South Korea. Now, I don't really know why the US cares about the pressure from South Korea. I don't understand those geopolitics. I mean, it's not really that much of a relevant country when it comes to the US. I don't know. I mean, realistically, if GM's sales figures in South Korea disappeared overnight, it wouldn't really matter all that much. South Korea, on the other hand, is very reliant on the US for sales of everything. Cars, consumer products, all kinds of things. So I'm not really sure why the US bowed down to the South Korean government. It seems surprising to me. If you know the reason, guys, let me know in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious on why this has happened. Now, lobbyists from French President Emmanuel Macron and various lobbyists from Europe have traveled to Washington, D.C. numerous times over the past 5 months to plead for leniency. They are saying their automotive industry will be decimated if they lose the US automotive market. Now, really, I think the country you would think that would be most concerned about this wouldn't actually be Europe. It would be Japan. Because, Japan is more reliant on the US than any other place in the world for car sales. If Toyota and Subaru lost their sales in the US, they would more than likely go bankrupt. Very, very likely. I don't think the Japanese government is in a position to bail them out. The Japanese government has more debt than any other country in history based on GDP per person. It's $10 trillion for a country of 100 million people with an economy that's shrinking. Japan is in serious trouble. There's no way known they can go and borrow the money that they need to bail out Toyota, Subaru, Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Mazda. All of those companies are in very unhealthy state when you look at their future projections for sales, because they are not prepared to make EVs, and many of them have enormous debts, like Toyota, $186 billion of debt, more debt than any company in history. So you're combining the most indebted country in history with the most indebted company in history, and that brand isn't prepared to sell EVs. So you can see how this is actually more problematic for Japan than it is for South Korea or Europe. Now, Hyundai, Kia, and the Korean government have aggressively lobbied the Biden administration to take a broader interpretation of the laws, in other words, change them, which allows vehicle to qualify for the $7,500 credit without meeting the strict content requirements on batteries and critical minerals that apply to vehicles sold at retail. Their arguments come with some threats. They have issued threats. In fact, the Japanese government has issued threats. South Korea has issued threats. European Union has issued sort of threats. They said, if the US persists with these rules, which they claim violate any number of World Trade Organization rules, there'll be consequences that will hurt US companies. In other words, they'll try to hurt US companies. Diplomacy is all well and good, says Clean Technica, but it helps to have a club in your back pocket in case you need it. And that's the club they're swinging around. Now, obviously, the European Union is happy. They're stoked. They're saying this is a win-win for both sides. I don't know how that's true, but anyway, according to Politico, US taxpayers will be able to take advantage of highly efficient EU-made electric vehicles and components. And I'm not sure where that's coming from. Tell me which vehicle is highly efficient in Europe, that's made in Europe. Please, which is it? You're going to have to tell me that, because I haven't heard of it. While EU companies that provide their customers through leases with cutting-edge clean vehicles can benefit from the incentives, the EU said in a statement. Now, as for European automotive market, I can see why they're desperate as well. Think about it, right? Chinese EV sales are just skyrocketing in China. Many of those manufacturers are in trouble in China or basically ceasing to exist in China. And now China is saying, Europe is next. We're coming for you. So you can see why Europe is getting a bit worried. I mean, look at the Chinese EV sales in Europe over the past 6 months. That's the tip. That's literally the very, very tiny tip of the iceberg that's about to hit Europe. And they don't know what's going to hit them. They just have no idea. I don't think they're really, truly paying attention to what these Chinese automakers plan to do. And that is to take over the European automotive market. It will happen. It's inevitable unless Europe makes some big changes, which haven't been announced or discussed at all yet. Now, Joe Manchin apparently is very angry. His vote was crucial to passing the Inflation Reduction Act in August, and he's not pleased with all these shenanigans by the Treasury Department. In a statement issued on December the 29th, he criticised the Treasury's interpretation and urged officials to pause implementation of the commercial electric vehicle clause. He says the agency's position bends to the desires of the companies looking for loopholes and is clearly inconsistent with the intent of the law. It only serves to weaken our ability to become a more energy secure nation. I don't normally agree with Joe Manchin on a lot of things, but here, I'm sorry, he's factually correct. It's true. This is just an about face. And if they wanted to be like this from the start, okay, that's a fair call. But I don't see how it's fair to make these rules, get automakers to basically sign contracts to invest more than $100 billion and then change your mind. That to me seems a bit duplicitous. Manchin has little grounds though to complain about the Treasury's reading of the law with regard to leased cars. James Lucier, Managing Director of Research from Capital Alpha Partners, tells Transport Topics. He said, "This is what happens when legislation does not go through regular order and you don't have a committee looking at all the provisions. The bill was largely crafted behind closed doors and at high speed between Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer." Now, I don't think it was high speed at all, but that's what they're saying. Maybe this is considered high speed. It seemed to take a long time to me. It sounds like the Treasury guidance is doing exactly what the bill said and should come as no surprise, he said. Now, I honestly actually don't think this will make a lot of difference for some companies, such as Tesla. Tesla already makes their cars in the US, right? And realistically, for a European automaker to compete with Tesla, if they're going to make the car in Europe, well, cost of making cars in Europe is not exactly cheap. Then they've got to send the car all across the ocean to the US. That's a significant cost in shipping. And then the customer has to lease it. So really, I don't think this is going to be a big problem for companies like Tesla. And I really don't think they're going to lose all this market share that the analysts are saying they will. And the key reason for this is that realistically, Tesla has margins. Other automakers do not. They're the only ones that make a profit in the US selling electric cars right now. No one else does. Tesla could, in theory, hold their reduced price and still make margin or at least break even on the $7,500 discount they've applied to cars in the US. They could hold that, then customers get an additional $7,500. This would make Tesla's vehicles much more affordable. That's a $15,000 difference. Tesla can hold that. The others cannot. That's a big difference. Now, it's going to take a while to figure out what's really going on here. This is a bit of a big storm, really. And it's going to take months for all of this to sort itself out. But either way, personally, I am a bit surprised by the government doing this. I thought they'd stick to their guns. But clearly, they've decided to change their minds. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments. As always, my friends, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again on the next video. Bye-bye.